Vienna, 1906. Just as the gas lamps flickered awake along the Ringstrasse and the imperial carriages clattered toward Schönbrunn Palace. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the cobblestones slick and glinting like cut glass beneath the wheels of the Habsburg court's golden-laced carriages. Inside the palace kitchens, the scent of roasted game and sugared almonds clung to the stone walls, but Rosalinde Lowell barely noticed. She moved quickly, quietly, a folded linen draped over one arm, the other steadying a silver tray. Her slippers made no sound on the polished floor. That was how she preferred it. No one paid attention to the girl who spoke too softly, who always kept her head bowed and her eyes down. That was how she'd kept her job these past 2 years, ever since the American ship docked and she'd taken the maid's post her aunt arranged. But silence didn't mean she didn't see. It didn't mean she didn't feel. Tonight, the imperial family was hosting a private supper in the Blue Salon. Only 6 guests. Intimate, but still grand. Rosalinde had no business being near it. Yet here she was, a last-minute replacement, carrying the tea tray through a narrow corridor that led to the side entrance of the salon. The door creaked as she opened it. She winced. He was already there. Prince Thorian Heller stood near the tall window, back half-turned, shoulders pulled tight beneath his navy uniform. His medals caught the low gaslight, gold and red glinting against the deep blue. He was 23, unmarried, and the heir presumptive not to the throne, but to the Archduke of Inner Austria. A politically neutered title, but still noble enough to require the strictest decorum. She shouldn't look at him, but she did. He turned. Their eyes met. She froze. He blinked once. Then again. His gaze dropped briefly to her tray, then back to her face. "You're not the usual girl," he said plainly, voice low, Viennese accent crisp. "I'm filling in," she said, barely above a whisper. He tilted his head slightly, then took a step forward. Not unkindly. Not with any of the cruel amusement she'd been taught to expect from men of his rank. Just curious. That accent. "You're American." "Yes, sir." He studied her face. "And what's your name, American girl with the quiet voice?" She hesitated. Then, "Rosalinde, sir." He smiled not broadly, just enough for her to see that it was real. "Rosalinde. That suits you." She should have curtsied then, should have turned and left. But she didn't. Her feet stayed rooted to the floor. Voices echoed down the hallway. The other guests. Thorian's expression shifted. "They'll be here soon." She nodded, stepping forward to place the tray on the sideboard. But as she moved past him, he whispered, "Wait." She stopped. He reached out not to touch her, but to lift the corner of the linen she'd folded so precisely. Beneath it, next to the teacups, was a single lavender sprig, half crushed. She hadn't noticed it had fallen from the vase she'd passed earlier. He picked it up and held it out to her. She took it with trembling fingers. "Thank you." Their hands didn't touch, but in the breath of space between them, something shifted. The door opened wider. Laughter spilled in. The Archduke, 2 barons, and Countess von Hohenberg entered, trailed by the Empress's cousin and a foreign naval attaché from Greece. Rosalinde stepped back into the shadows and vanished. But he didn't forget. 3 nights later, a folded square of paper appeared beneath the rim of her tea tray. No handwriting, no name, just a drawing of lavender and a time, midnight. Greenhouse. She stared at it until her shift ended. Then she went. The Schönbrunn greenhouse was locked after dark, but someone had left the side door ajar. She slipped in, the scent of damp earth and citrus blossoms wrapping around her like a shawl. He was already there. "I didn't think you'd come," Thorian said. "I almost didn't." He looked at her, not with command, but hope. "Then why did you?" She looked down at her hands. "Because you looked at me, not through me." He exhaled, a sound part relief, part wonder. "Rosalinde," he said, like he'd been waiting to say it again. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But he offered her his hand. She took it. That night began everything. They met in stolen pockets of time between supper service and early mass, between fencing sessions and court dinners. Once, he dropped a coin in the fountain as she passed. She fished it out later, finding a message etched into the edge. "You said lavender is for courage." It was, and she would need it, because by the end of the month, their secret was no longer entirely secret. It was the head butler who noticed first. A misplaced glove. A lock turned the wrong way. He whispered it to the Empress's lady-in-waiting, who whispered it to Baron Farkas, who brought it to the Archduke. And then came the duel, not over Rosalinde, never officially, but over a matter of honor between Thorian and the foreign naval attaché, who had made a crude comment about the American girl with the servant's hands. Thorian struck him. The duel was set for dawn. Rosalinde found out from the stable boy, who adored her quietly and told her everything he heard. She didn't cry, didn't plead, just went to the chapel, lit a candle, and waited. But Thorian didn't fall. He won. The attaché was wounded but would live. And Thorian's reputation, though singed, remained intact. The duel was hushed, wrapped in royal discretion. But Rosalinde's position was not. She was dismissed the next morning. Your accent, the head housekeeper said, not unkindly. It was always going to give you away. Rosalinde packed her satchel. No one stopped her. No carriage was sent. She walked out into the gray rain, head high, shoes soaked. But he found her. Thorian arrived not in uniform, but in a plain charcoal coat, his cap pulled low. He hailed her name from across the square. Rosalinde. She turned, stunned. He reached her, breathless. Don't go. They dismissed me. I know. But I didn't. She shook her head. What are we doing, Thorian? You're a prince. And you're the only one who listens when I speak. She looked at him, rain running down her cheeks. They'll never let us. I don't care. He took her hand. This time, he didn't let go. And just like that, the soft-voiced maid who had dared to love the prince changed his world forever. The house on Mariahilferstrasse was shuttered but dry. The landlady, a Viennese widow with a fondness for foreign borders, had taken Rosalinde in without questions, only glancing once at the soaked hem of her skirt before nodding toward the attic room. There were 3 locks on the door and a narrow bed beneath the eaves. It was enough. On the 3rd morning, Thorian came again, this time without his overcoat. His cheeks were wind-flushed from walking, his gloves creased with damp. He didn't knock. He waited by the bakery across the street and watched until the landlady emerged with her market basket. Only then did he climb the stairs. Rosalinde opened the door before he raised his hand to knock. You shouldn't be here, she said, stepping aside. I've already lost 1 duel, he replied. Another scandal won't kill me. She closed the door behind him. You didn't lose. Thorian looked around the small room, noting the cracked basin, the threadbare shawl folded neatly at the foot of the bed. This isn't where you belong. It's where I can afford. He turned to her. Come to Trieste. She blinked. What? My cousin commands a regiment there. It's far enough from court to be quiet, but not so far that I can't send for you. I'll arrange a position through the governor's wife. She keeps a girls' school, teaches French and needlework. You speak both. Rosalinde folded her arms. And what would I be to you there? His gaze didn't shift. The woman I meet at the Rose Gate every Thursday evening. A silence bloomed between them. Then she said, You would do that? I already have. If you say yes, the carriage leaves at dawn tomorrow. She sat slowly on the edge of the bed. What happens when someone recognizes me? Then they'll think I'm visiting my cousin's school to inspect the curriculum. You're a terrible liar. I'm learning. Rosalinde looked down at her hands. And if I stay? Then I'll come here every day until your landlady starts charging me rent. She laughed, a sound she hadn't made in weeks. You'd hate Trieste. I'd hate a world without you in it more. She stood, walked to the window, and drew back the curtain. The street below was quiet, the cobblestones drying in the sun. A black dog nosed along a gutter. He didn't speak again, just waited. At last, she said, Will I be safe there? With me? Always. She turned to him. Then I'll go. That evening, she wrote a letter to her aunt in New York, careful in her phrasing, vague in her details. She folded it between the pages of a devotional book, tucked it into her satchel, and sat beside the window until the gaslights flickered on across the city. At dawn, the carriage arrived. The driver nodded once at Rosalinde and loaded her satchel without comment. Thorian helped her up, his hand steady beneath her elbow, then climbed in beside her. No uniform, no titles, just a man with a name and a promise. They rode in silence as the city slipped away, the smoke of morning ovens rising behind them, the hills of Lower Austria turning green with spring. Hours passed. They didn't speak much. He dozed, briefly, his shoulder brushing hers. She let it stay. When they reached the edge of the Adriatic, the wind picked up, salt in its breath. Trieste lay below them, a spill of ochre roofs and spires against the sea. He leaned forward, pointing. There, that red-tiled building with the bell tower. That's the school. Do they know why I'm really coming? They know you're here to teach. Nothing more. The carriage pulled into the courtyard. A woman in dove-gray silk emerged from the doorway, her hair pinned with garnets. She greeted Thorian with a nod, then turned to Rosalinde. You're the new instructress? Yes, ma'am. Follow me. As they crossed the threshold, Thorian caught Rosalinde's hand. Just once. Just long enough. She looked back once before disappearing inside. That night, through the narrow window of her new room, Rosalinde watched the moon rise over the sea. Somewhere beyond the courtyard wall, she knew he was waiting. And beneath the pillow where she would rest her head, she found a folded square of lavender-scented paper. It held no words, just a pressed flower, and the shape of a promise. The bell tower struck 3 as Rosalinde stepped onto the gravel path behind the school, her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. The wind carried the scent of myrtle from the hedges, and a few seagulls wheeled above the tiled roofs, crying into the dusk. She walked slowly, boots stirring the dust, until she reached the iron gate behind the chapel garden, the one that opened onto the rider's path, where the cliffs curved above the sea. He was there, seated on a low stone bench, coat folded beside him, eyes turned toward the horizon where the water burned violet. Thorian stood when he saw her, brushing his gloved hands together, and stepped forward. You're early, she said, stopping just short of him. So are you, he replied. I thought I'd be the only one impatient. She glanced down at the crushed rosemary beneath her feet. I couldn't sleep. One of the girls had a nightmare. I stayed until she settled. You're still kinder than I deserve. I didn't say it was for you. He smiled faintly and looked past her toward the tower, now cloaked in shadow. You've been here almost 3 weeks. I know. It feels longer. I know that too. He hesitated before drawing something from the inner pocket of his coat, a small, leather-bound notebook. He held it out, but didn't speak. She took it carefully, running her fingers along the binding. Is it yours? No. It was my mother's. She made notes on every city she visited. Recipes, customs, odd little phrases she didn't want to forget. There's a page on Trieste. I thought you might find it useful. Rosalinde opened it slowly. On the 3rd page, under a line of slanted ink, were words in broken Slovenian and a sketch of a street vendor's cart. Below that, a pressed leaf. She wrote about apricot cakes, she murmured. Apparently they're best at the Sunday market. South End. She looked up. You read it too? I read the whole thing. I wanted to know what she saw in this place. And did you? He nodded once. She saw beginnings. Rosalinde closed the book and held it to her chest. Why did you give this to me? Because I want you to stay. I am staying. No, I mean past summer. Past the school term. I spoke to my cousin's wife. There's a position at the museum. Translation work. You'd be perfect for it. I'm not a scholar. You speak French, English, and enough German to make the curator nearly faint with relief. That's all they care about. Why are you doing this? He looked at her, his voice low. Because I love you. And I want to stop pretending that I come here just to walk beside the sea. Her breath caught. He stepped closer. I want to be with you. As a man, not a prince. I want to build something that doesn't vanish every time the sun rises. She stepped back, just once. And what happens when Vienna calls you home? I'll answer. But not alone. Thorian. He didn't move. If we return together, I won't ask for permission. I'll ask for recognition. They won't approve. I don't need them to. She looked down at the book again. And what if I fail? What if I'm not enough for all of this? You already are. The wind shifted, lifting the hem of her shawl. Somewhere behind them, a bell rang for evening prayers. She looked up, and for a long time, she said nothing. Then she reached for his hand. If I take that job, I'll need a place near the museum. There's a flat above the violin maker's shop. Too noisy. There's another above the bookseller's. Quiet. A view of the harbor. She nodded. That one. He drew her hand to his lips, no flourish, no courtly pretense, just a kiss pressed to the back of her fingers. I'll speak to the bookseller tomorrow, he said. I'll speak to the headmistress. And then, she smiled, just enough for him to see it. Then we'll walk beside the sea again. But not as a secret. The gulls had quieted. The sky turned amber. And in the hush between breaths and bells, the maid who once spoke softly stood beside the prince, and neither had to whisper to be heard. The first snowfall came late that year, sifting down from a pale sky as November surrendered to December. In Trieste, it clung in thin veils to the rooftops and left the sea unchanged, still iron gray, still restless. Rosalinde stood at the frost-laced window of her new apartment, the one above the bookseller's shop, and pressed her fingertips to the glass. Below, the market stalls had been taken down early. A boy ran past trailing a branch of pine and red ribbons. She didn't call out to him. Behind her, stacked books waited for sorting, their spines in half a dozen languages. The museum had offered her the indexing work without hesitation. She traced the inked title of a volume in Slavic script, then turned as the door creaked open. Thorian stepped in, brushing snow from his shoulders. His coat was damp at the seams, his boots tracking slush across the floorboards. "You walked again?" she asked. The carriage horses were taken for the St. Nicholas procession. He leaned to unlace his boots, pausing when he noticed the open ledger beside the window. "You've been working since morning? There are Ottoman maps in the new batch." "I didn't want to leave them unsorted." He came to stand beside her, not touching, just near enough that their breath fogged the same pain. "And the girls at the school? They made paper angels and put them in the convent garden. One of them tried to give hers wings made of real silver leaf. It flaked off in the wind." He folded his hands behind his back, glancing at her reflection in the darkened window. "You don't miss Vienna?" She didn't answer immediately. "Then, not the city." He turned to face her fully. "You could still go back. You could take a ship home. Write your aunt. Tell her you've had enough of foreign winters and royal suns. I know. And yet you stay." She met his gaze. "You asked me once if I'd be safe with you. But safety wasn't what I needed. I needed to be seen." He nodded slowly. "And now I need to be heard." He stepped closer. "Then say what you came here to say, Rosalinde." She looked at him not as a prince, but as the man who had met her in silence and never once demanded she speak louder than her own voice aloud. "I love you," she said, "and I don't want this to end in borrowed rooms and hidden letters. I want to wake beside you without pretending it was an accident. I want your name, not because I need it, but because I choose it." He didn't move for a long moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and drew out a folded paper, sealed with a plain black ribbon. "I wrote to my father," he said, "not to ask for blessing, to inform him. He can withdraw my stipend, strip my titles, declare me unfit. I won't change my course." Rosalinde touched the edge of the paper. "And what did he say?" "I don't know yet. I sent the letter only yesterday." "But I meant every word." She stepped away from the window and crossed to the table, where a kettle sat cooling beside 2 cups. She poured tea, steady-handed, and passed him one. "If he disowns you," she said, "what will you do?" "I'll teach fencing to spoiled sons and write essays no one reads." "And if he accepts us?" Thorian smiled, not with triumph, but with something quieter, steadier. "Then I'll marry you in the garden of that chapel you passed on your first morning here. The one with the rusted gate and the crooked bell." Rosalinde set her cup down. "I'll mend the gate. And I'll ring the bell." They stood in silence as the snow thickened outside, the window blurring with white. The world narrowed to the hush between them, where nothing hurried and nothing needed to be said twice. Later that night, while she shelved the last of the maps, he lit the fire and moved the armchair closer, setting her shawl across its back. They didn't speak again until the bells marked the hour. When they did, it was only to decide whether to walk to the bakery at dawn or wait until the next market day. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the maid who once spoke softly sat beside the prince who had learned to listen, and together they built a life without disguise or retreat, one page, one promise, one winter's night at a time.
Vienna, 1906. Just as the gas lamps flickered awake along the Ringstrasse and the imperial carriages clattered toward Schönbrunn Palace. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the cobblestones slick and glinting like cut glass beneath the wheels of the Habsburg court's golden-laced carriages. Inside the palace kitchens, the scent of roasted game and sugared almonds clung to the stone walls, but Rosalinde Lowell barely noticed. She moved quickly, quietly, a folded linen draped over one arm, the other steadying a silver tray. Her slippers made no sound on the polished floor. That was how she preferred it. No one paid attention to the girl who spoke too softly, who always kept her head bowed and her eyes down. That was how she'd kept her job these past 2 years, ever since the American ship docked and she'd taken the maid's post her aunt arranged. But silence didn't mean she didn't see. It didn't mean she didn't feel. Tonight, the imperial family was hosting a private supper in the blue salon. Only 6 guests. Intimate, but still grand. Rosalinde had no business being near it. Yet here she was, a last-minute replacement, carrying the tea tray through a narrow corridor that led to the side entrance of the salon. The door creaked as she opened it. She winced. He was already there. Prince Thorian Heller stood near the tall window, back half-turned, shoulders pulled tight beneath his navy uniform. His metals caught the low gaslight, gold and red glinting against the deep blue. He was 23, unmarried, and the heir presumptive not to the throne, but to the Archduke of Inner Austria. A politically neutered title, but still noble enough to require the strictest decorum. She shouldn't look at him, but she did. He turned. Their eyes met. She froze. He blinked once. Then again. His gaze dropped briefly to her tray, then back to her face. "You're not the usual girl," he said plainly, voice low, Viennese accent crisp. I'm filling in," she said, barely above a whisper. He tilted his head slightly, then took a step forward. Not unkindly. Not with any of the cruel amusement she'd been taught to expect from men of his rank. Just curious. That accent. "You're American." "Yes, sir." He studied her face. "And what's your name, American girl with the quiet voice?" She hesitated. Then, "Rosalinde, sir." He smiled not broadly, just enough for her to see that it was real. "Rosalinde. That suits you." She should have curtsied then. Should have turned and left.